Scythe Tleppo, Chapter 6. After 6 months living with Francis, my mother finally came out to Florida. At first she lived with us while she scouted for a new apartment. Living with the two of them was stressful. Julie didn't allow Francis to dramatize or be negative. Not anymore. My mother became annoyed when Francis whistled and left a room. She talked back and didn't mince words. I was happy to see my mom again, but felt bad for my grandmother. Julie viewed her as a dramatizer, someone who embellishes negative emotions. But to me, her behavior seemed normal after losing her husband. We moved into an apartment in Clearwater after a few weeks, and my mother took over the responsibility of care for Francis. They worked out their own way to move forward together while I got back to the life I had before. I went in sessions and courses because that's what my mother wanted for me. And I knew better than to fight back. She enrolled me in another Scientology school, A to B. I wrote wonderful success stories each time. I finished a course for Scientology Action. I did my purification rundown again to clear my body of drugs and radiation, though I didn't notice anything change. Most of my life became Scientology all over again. Regret. Frances' mother was close to dying, so we went to visit her in the hospital a couple of times. She was a negative, spiteful person on her deathbed. My mom told me she wasn't always that way, but had changed in her final years, filled with regrets about her life choices. I wonder what that could be. I thought about the concept a lot, how people change as their own deaths near, and how I would view my life if I look back on it. She wanted to do one final nice thing for the family, though, so she paid for a cruise vacation for all of us. We left home from Florida and hit the Bahamas, Jamaica, the Keys, and Cozumel, Mexico. It was all the women of the family and me. Being a 10-year-old boy in a family of all women was sometimes overwhelming, but I did enjoy seeing other countries. Travel seemed like such a luxury. I wish my mother enjoyed traveling. After the trip, I was back to the routine again. Frances was recovered, at least enough to be a Scientologist again. And the family was back on track from their perspective. From mine, it was stuck in a loop. At A to B school, some kids decided I was no longer Nathan Rich. I was nothing poor, the type thing only children can think of. I was both annoyed at the name but impressed by the wordplay. Nothing poor, very creative. The afterglow of being out of the ranch slowly wore off, and though I picked up a few friends at the school who didn't think I was nothing, the blackness dripped inside me still. By the time I was 11, I started to fall behind in sessions and courses. Scientology took my mother's money to deliver services to me. Services I wasn't interested in receiving. I struggled to carry on, conflicted and lonely. I was still her little man, but couldn't keep it up much longer. I needed support, or the whole thing would come crashing down again. Venom. My mother still didn't give me any allowance, and no amount of cleaning, begging, or negotiating changed that. All I wanted was a normal life. I wanted an allowance, and I wanted to break the rules sometimes. I wanted to go to school and have a crush on a girl. I just didn't want the life I had. I never did. From my earliest memories, I just didn't want it. And yet I loved my mother with all my heart. It was very confusing and unnerving. Why did I choose this body and to live in this Scientology family? I don't want any of this. Why did I want it when I was just a Thetan? My neighborhood friend and I went to the local mall one day and stole some comic books. Spider-Man with Venom. Nice. We put them in our backpacks and walked out of the store. It was easy. We weren't afraid of wogs because they're degraded and incompetent. Scientologists are the capable people in this world, not them. We went to another store and stole baseball cards. One of the packs might have a Jose Canseco. You never know. We went to another store and then another. After stealing various items from 6 stores, we tried to grab some watches from a 7th, but security spotted and detained us. My mom arrived at the store, disappointed and angry. I had ditched Scientology courses room and was stealing. What she didn't know would have upset her even more, though doubt was seeping into my mind. Something about the experience with Frances just wasn't making sense. She was an absolute wreck about Marty's death and believed she had caused it. I couldn't understand how an OT8 could allow this to happen, and no one provided me with any good answers. Isn't she supposed to have total cause over life? She has no reactive mind anymore. Isn't she supposed to be immune to uncontrollable grief? How could a master of Scientology like her let something so horrible happen? To me, her reaction to the loss seemed normal. She seemed like any other widow grieving in serious pain. But if she's normal, doesn't that mean Scientology didn't help her? At the very least, didn't deliver the help it promised. Serious doubt about the efficacy of Scientology was creeping into my world. But while I was slipping away from my beliefs, something else was going on in the Scientology world, something big. The war was almost over. Friends, Scientology had an announcement to make and everyone was talking about it. In the Scientology world, chatter and guesses about what it was going to be were rampant. We heard the announcement was going to be a big one. My mom took me to the event at Flag, and the second we arrived, it was clear the rumors were right. It was a big one. I was still on my mother's bad side from the shoplifting incident, but was allowed to go with her to participate. Crowds of Scientologists gathered outside the auditorium. Non-alcoholic champagne prepared by Sea Org members dressed as waiters. Sea Org members dressed as waiters reinforced the celebratory environment. People connected with each other via grins and excitement. There was an energy in the air and electricity. We took our seats inside. The event started as they all do. A bunch of booming music and intensely positive news about the great success of Scientology. There are millions of Scientologists positively affecting everything, and everyone on the globe, they reminded us. Everyone loves Scientology and it's just growing and growing. Non-Scientologists keep screwing everything up, and the ultra-capable Scientologists keep up the mess. After a while, the big announcement finally came. Scientology attained tax-exempt status as a religious entity from the IRS. The entire room erupted in a collective cheer. Legs stomped, people clapped, shouted, and whistled. Huge title cards ran across the screens. The war is over. Waves of excitement visibly shoved through the crowds of Scientologists. I had a different reaction. I stood unimpressed, waiting for the big news, unaware I'd already heard it. When I finally realized the announcement was about money, my curiosity withered. I thought Scientology was a religion already. Why did we need to apply for tax benefits? I glanced at my mother in my peripheral. Her expression was that of extreme elation. Her universe was rocked. All of this just for some money. I thought they were going to announce the planet was finally clear, or that Lafayette had come back to Earth or something. Money. My mother clapped her hands to pieces and let out occasional cheers of, "It's amazing! Oh my God, it's amazing!" And we did it. When she slowly noticed I was less enthused than her, she appeared annoyed. I worried she'd suspect I was somehow out ethics. So I acted as thrilled as I could, but there were other things on my mind. I was doubting Scientology even more. To my mom, I was second to Scientology. It was obvious to me. My mother didn't treat me like a child, nor like her son. Her attitude towards me was generally devoid of the loving feeling I had observed on television. Hugs, kisses, and loving remarks weren't a big part of my life, except as rewards for Scientology accomplishments. Cracks in my confidence about Scientology pushed me to reevaluate my relationship with my mother. After the event, we went home, away from all the activity, back to the quiet apartment. I asked her about who she was to me in the gentlest way I could that night. "Mom, how come you're not more mom-like to me?" I inquired. She knew what I meant. Loving, nurturing. Us against them. Well, I guess it's because I don't really consider you my son. I'm more like your friend. I'm here to help you get up the bridge. She was just being honest. She viewed us as friends. I was related to her in this lifetime. But getting mankind up the bridge was her main concern, not the specifics of my childhood or upbringing. Not WOG ideas like family ties or blood being thicker than water. Scientology was her main concern, not me. Backflash. Life wasn't going too well for me. I was trapped in the purgatory of Scientology but could feel myself changing. The music I picked up at the ranch was back in my life, but I had no friends to connect with. 9 Inch Nails had a specific place in my soul. Trent Reznor's deep lyrics hinted to me there were thinkers in the world and things other than those in my life. There were deep thinkers out there just like me. I needed to find them. The Box TV channel played music videos for a fee, something I'd never seen before. I didn't have money, but I watched for videos that didn't get airplay on MTV. My daily reading shifted from zoo books and Spider-Man to heavy metal magazines. Video games slowly became boring to me. I looked to public access television, anything to bring me alternative information. Though I didn't think clearly about it all at the time, I was changing, growing. A to B school expelled me for backflash. I talked back. I disobeyed. Scientology course supervisors. I couldn't get with the program because I was tired of learning about how to learn and how to communicate. I wanted to learn about the world, the actual real world. Even though I hadn't finished the school year, it was the closest I'd ever been to completing one. WOGs. My Aunt Sharon and her second husband, Jake Lefkowitz, took my cousin Juliet and me across the country a few times in my young life. I had visited most of the states in America by 11 or 12, though mostly only tourist spots and the road. Sharon invited my cousin and me to travel Europe with her. We went to England, Scotland, and France, where I wondered why Parisians hated Americans so much. Overall, though, the trip was great, and I appreciated it. Why doesn't my mom like traveling? All she did was sit at home and talk about Scientology. At least Sharon pretended to be normal sometimes. Maybe my mother had no one to pretend to, but Sharon did. Sharon runs a fan club for Jeanette MacDonald and Nelson Eddy called Simply McEddy. She sells books and records to fans at gatherings, enamored with the Hollywood couple's secret romance. Despite her constant interaction with the fans, they didn't know anything about Scientology or who she really was. She instructed me on the proper way to interact with WOGs, the non-Scientologist dullards. WOGs can't handle the truth. It's out reality for them. They are too degraded, she said to me. I'd been learning how to deal with WOGs by osmosis for years, but she was teaching me directly. Sharon presents herself to WOGs as a quiet, conservative, and non-threatening homemaker, but behind her performance is a devout Scientologist, and there are only 3 kinds of people to a Scientologist: potential Scientologists, potential or actual enemies of Scientology, and devout Scientologists. WOGs are potential Scientologists who aren't ready to be indoctrinated yet. Fleeting code words and coined terms could have revealed the truth to those with a Scientology background, but not WOGs. She thought of them as hapless sheep with money, sources of income with faces. It took years of reflection for me to see her behaviors for what they were. At the time I saw those WOGs as she did, I was a Scientologist. Back in Florida, I entered a new school in nearby Dunedin. Was a non-Scientology private school, the first time I'd ever been to. What I found there was something more precious than a baseball rookie card, a father. Well, not quite a father, but a father figure. A man from Boston. I was 12 years old and had never completed a full year of schooling, but I entered 7th grade ready to give school another chance. Anything was a welcome distraction from my dissolving worldview. Dunedin Academy was a K-12 school with a gazebo, a small soccer field, and orange trees everywhere. There were uniforms for kids and a tight schedule to follow. The same teacher taught every subject for 7th and 8th grade. Frank Uniatowski. Mr. U had thinning hair, a Boston accent, and beautiful cursive handwriting. He didn't accept talking back or goofing off. He sent misbehaving kids to detention. He didn't ignore the troublemakers. He worked to correct their behavior. Some of the kids, especially the more rebellious ones, hated Mr. U. They complained, said he was terrible, and acted out, but it didn't sway him. He was a focused, persistent teacher. He graded our work with great attention to detail. His needs seemed obvious to me. He wanted great work done by great kids. He didn't want to be popular, cool, or rich. He wanted to teach kids in his version of the right way. The principal, Dr. Dale Porter, had white hair and a large frame. He was strict but righteous. Despite initially being nervous around him, I soon learned he was also caring. He was a strong leader for Dunedin Academy, a man who really cared about educating kids. Instead of Lafayette's Learning How to Learn course, we had social studies. Instead of spending hours drilling the exercises in how to communicate, they taught me math. And instead of studying the dogma in overcoming ups and downs in life, I studied geography, music, and English. Before I started school, my core was filling with darkness and doubt. But just as my home experience was slowly beginning to slip back into disarray, I came across an interesting challenge in Dunedin Academy. I had always longed to be normal. I wanted to be a normal kid and do normal things with my family. Now I was at a normal private school. Can I do it? Can I deliver? Am I going to try? What is going to happen if they kick me out of this school too? I didn't know, but I fought the uncertainty. I wanted whatever was on the other side of genuine effort. I had a real chance. Cautious but focused. I gave it a shot. Chocolate. In the beginning, I didn't stand out too much. I was what you'd expect from an awkward and nerdy 12-year-old kid. My curly hair and soft nature didn't impress the cool kids. I found them to be preoccupied with themselves, unintelligent and reactionary. They got the girls and the attention, but in Mr. U's class, they were powerless. School wasn't the only change. I was hitting puberty as well. I was becoming a man, and my desire to explore the world around me was growing. I wanted to heal, put old memories behind me, and I put my doubts about Scientology on the back burner. To help with stress levels in my school image, I took up smoking, just like my mom. She smoked, and Lafayette smoked too. Nothing wrong with that. Lafayette rather famously implied cigarettes don't cause cancer, which many Scientologists still believe. I adapted well to the rigid structure of class, with nothing to do but study. I found I liked some of the subject as my mind delved into their nuances. The English language had rules, laws, and qualities of its own. I found out there were other authors in the world that penned books I had never heard of. They didn't have claims about being the absolute truth written all over them, but they were good even still. In contrast to Lafayette's direct writing style, there were authors with artistic styles who told stories with clear point, meaning, or message. The reader was left to decide if their stories were valuable. When school let out at 3 p.m., I stayed. My mother left me there until she got off work because she didn't allow me to go home alone. Every kid in detention stayed as well, as punishment. At first, I sat at my desk, just like them. After a week or so, Mr. U approached me for the first time. He bent towards my desk. "Hey, Nathan. Do you want some chocolate?" he asked quietly. Who would say no to that? Of course I want chocolate. Sure, I exclaimed. He led me back to his desk. We sat behind the other students, ate Hershey's chocolate bars, and made conversation. Mr. Yu made the detention kids look straight ahead or put their heads on their desks or write reports while we hung out with each other. I felt lucky and appreciated. We spoke about music and composers. He lent me some CDs of Beethoven, Mozart, and Brahms. He loved Hershey's milk chocolate, classical music, and plants. But most of all, teaching. There wasn't anything else in his life that I ever found out about. Our relationship formed between us. Most days I sat at his desk after class for chocolate and chit-chat. He was fascinating to me, a man whose goals were simple, and yet he was so happy. He didn't seem religious at all, and certainly wasn't a Scientologist. When I brought up my Scientology background, he was curious and a tiny bit concerned, but careful not to disrespect my beliefs. No one knew much about what Scientology was back then, even in cities next to Clearwater. I listened to those classical CDs and found his knowledge of music and composers entertaining. I enjoyed watching him enjoy the subject. That rubbed off on me. I discovered through him that enjoyment could come from simple things. I never wanted Scientology, and he was living proof that I didn't need it to be successful. Mr. Yu was happy, his life exactly how he wanted. He had everything he needed, like a fish in the ocean. There was no want. There was no hole in his mind, needing policies and bulletins, courses and auditing. Mr. Yu befriended me and became my mentor. I wanted to do well in class. Then I wanted to do better than well. I wanted to ace every class. I shifted focus from introspection and depression to attention at school, study, and knowledge. I wrote extra credit reports late into the night when I wasn't getting poetry by candlelight in bed. I was learning to balance darker thoughts with a new positive influence. I was learning to express myself too. There were slip-ups here and there, but overall, I became an excellent student. My report cards went from C's and D's to B's and A's. They went from B's and A's to A's and A pluses, but I wasn't satisfied. I pushed myself with laser focus and brought myself from A plus average to straight A plus in every single subject. I placed at high school levels in standardized tests for reading, math, and English. I was winning at school. I was winning for the first time without using any Scientology. I'd found something I'd never had before, a proper mentor. I wanted to do well for him and for myself. That's the power of a good teacher. I was excited to go to school for the first time. Part of the reason I respected Mr. Yu so much was his work ethic. He was not just a masterful teacher who commanded an effective class. He was the first true expert I ever met, an expert teacher, an expert friend. After all, Scientology's bragging about how great they are at everything. This was the first time I ever came face to face with an actual expert at something. Just another tiny splinter in my mind about the problems of Scientology. He was one of the very few men I've ever truly respected, and he served as a stand-in father figure during that time. I would have been lucky to have him as a father.